A study conducted by the Headmasters and Headmistresses Conference studies the use of mobile devices overnight and the impact it has on teenage health. The finding acknowledged that in 2016, 45% of adolescents surveyed admitting to using their phones after attempting to sleep at night. Of that population, 94% of students reported using social media in their rooms after the time they woke up from sleeping. As the amount of time spent on interactive media sites increases among American youth, teenagers expose themselves to sources that are not credible and depict falsehoods. This leads American society to question, how does social media negatively impact American adolescents as various platforms encourage conformity regularly? If what teenagers are exposing themselves to on networking sites are portraying false expectations and inaccurate data online, then the future of American society is in the hands of a generation without validity behind their personal beliefs. Today, I'm going to argue that as a result of conformity from social media, American adolescents are negatively impacted socially, culturally, and politically. As the use of social media is increasing among American youth, younger generations face social and cultural pressures that are created online. With social coercion to fit into modern trends on different media platforms, conformity among adolescents is advancing. Writer and researcher Rachel Monroe from The Atlantic recognizes the negative effects social media has on American teenagers, stemming from what juveniles wear to how networking leverage greatly exploits daily styles and decisions, are issue that Monroe discusses in the article. Monroe acknowledges that the more we use social media, the more time and money we spend shopping online. Monroe furthermore recognizes that in 2017, a poll surveyed women ages 18 to 25. 41% of those women solicited felt pressure to conform to social normalities and wear a different outfit each day. Additionally, feeling pressured not to repeat outfits every day and wasting money on unnecessary clothing is extremely harmful to the American economy. Not only are companies like H&M mass-producing clothing at a rate that is too advanced for consumers to purchase, but clothing and finances are being wasted. Similarly, social media portrays influencers who advocate wearing clothing pertaining only to specific brands and spending countless amounts of money on excessive wardrobes. Without virtual outlets constantly posting, influencing, and potentially restricting the truth, there would be less pressure for adolescents to fit in with social and cultural standards. Social media is encouraging conformity to occur regularly, furthermore negatively affecting the social and cultural life of most Americans. With erroneous viewpoints, sources, and facts being displayed throughout networking outlets, it becomes difficult for teenagers to define what is factual versus what is not the truth. As social media develops among younger generations, juveniles and their political views are easily conformed to the beliefs and sentiments stimulated by virtual interactions through online platforms. A study conducted by the Pew Research Center states that 64% of Americans feel as though social media harms their daily lives. With age limitations varying depending on the social platform, it is applicable for adolescents to use social media despite age restrictions. With the future of American politics being twisted and construed on the internet, it becomes difficult for juveniles to discern between right and wrong. Authors and researchers from the Department of Psychology at the University of Maryland, Michelle J. Gelfand, and additional researchers discuss the outcomes that ritualistic synchrony has throughout different cultures. Ritualistic synchrony is a collaboration in communities of people that increases the social complicity in decision-making and conformity within group settings. Gelfand acknowledges how people in groups that experience synchrony tend to feel more trusting and united with their group members. Ritualistic synchrony can occur in different forms depending on the culture. Numerous normalities in American culture can be considered ritualistic synchrony. For instance, social media assembles groups of people who have the ability but lack the knowledge to persuade political beliefs a certain way. When adolescents not in an age mature enough to form viable opinions are exposed to false political propaganda, their opinions are likely to conform to uncredible politics on social media rather than the truth through credible news outlets. If the future generations of America are making important political decisions established off online networks conveying potentially false information online, then the future of American politics is greatly at risk. In opposition to this, varying research provides viewpoints on how social media is impacting society in positive ways. Benjamin Cavalozzi, a psychology researcher at the University of California, claims that online communities can provide young people with social and psychological support that's unavailable to them at home, at school, or in their neighborhoods. For many adolescents without supportive people who live close by, a life without social media may seem confining. Cavalozzi insists that the opportunities online outlets provide are greater than the negative. Despite these claims, social media has a great number of risks when adolescents are using various platforms regularly despite age restrictions. Until social media creates an honest, safe, and credible place to share information, facts, and opinions, adolescents will continue to conform their behaviors, opinions, and styles to what social media deems as acceptable. Ultimately, social media will continue to impact the American youth without restrictions and changes made to how adolescents use various platforms. Adolescents' social life and political views are being poorly affected as media forums continue to push misinformation and encourage conformity throughout American society. Authors of Fact vs. Fiction, Darren Hudgens, Director of Instructional Technology at the Organization for Educational Technology and Curriculum, and Jennifer Lagarde, consultant for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, discuss solutions to benefit adolescents as they navigate a world structured around social media. Hudgens and Lagarde offer the solution of teaching adolescents as they are learning in an education-based setting how to distinguish between fake news versus actuality to be able to implement their knowledge of using social media. Hudgens and Lagarde describe how helping our students develop the skills they need to discern from fact from fiction is the fundamental skill of citizenry. They acknowledge that social media outlets tend to present news and information in misleading ways that may be challenging for adolescents who do not know how to differentiate between truth versus fiction. As Hudgens and Lagarde discuss the negative repercussions social media presents, they suggest that adolescents should be taught from a young age how to discern between fact and fiction. If educators and school districts could thoroughly show their students, the youth of America, how to use social media and online networks in general, it would expose adolescents to gaining knowledge on signs of fiction versus reality. Hudgens and Lagarde acknowledge that the problem doesn't stem from technology, it's us. They describe how it is the way the human brain functions, and it is not simply because people aren't intelligent, it is the fact that people in general are social animals who strive for likes and attention. Consequently, the human brain becomes lazy as people skim for headlines and the easy answer. If adolescents are trained at a young age how to determine between fiction and truth, then conformity will be less likely to occur and the truth will be more important than potential fiction. A limitation to this solution commences from school districts' potential reluctance to pay for curriculum to train teachers and better educate their students on depicting fiction from media outlets. An additional limitation to this solution will be that there is no guarantee that the skills adolescents will be taught will be applied when using social media. Conformity could still continue to be a pressing issue as teenagers form their opinions and behaviors off of potentially misleading information online. Despite these limitations, this is the best solution, considering it offers adolescents the opportunity to form sensible opinions on politics and shape their social and cultural identities based on truth rather than fiction. Thank you.
Mackenzie, okay, thank you. The first question. How did you handle the differing perspectives in order to reach a conclusion?
So in my counterclaim paragraph, I used a psychology researcher, Benjamin Calvadozzi, a researcher from the University of California. And Calvadozzi acknowledges how social media presents many opportunities to adolescents that they would not have if in a world without social media. For example, communicating online and socialization in an aspect that a world without social media would not represent. In my counter argument, this opposing perspective helped me reach the conclusion that my conclusion ultimately needed to not necessarily get rid of social media or change the way social media works, but it needed to almost allow the adolescents to be able to adjust how they view social media. And so my solution of student that Darren Hudgens and Jennifer Lagarde, authors of Fact vs. Fiction, offer the solution if students should be provided instruction in school at a young age to determine fact versus fiction. And so these opposing perspectives helped me reach the conclusion and solution that adolescents and how they view social media and how they determine fact from fiction is crucial to a solution to conformity from social media.
Okay, all right, thanks. So second, what additional questions emerged from your research and why are those questions important?
An additional question that emerged from my research was why do parents in some cases choose to ignore the negative effects of social media? What made me really question this was my source from my introduction paragraph, the Headmasters and Headmistress Conference, who acknowledged that 45% of adolescents use social media after bed. And of that 45%, 94% of adolescents are using social media. And so that made me question, do parents realize what their children are doing online or do they care? And so if I would have had more time, I would have done additional research on this question, and I feel like this was important to the development of my paper because it made me make sure I was covering every point, and it ultimately made my solution adapt to how made me create a solution that would allow adolescents to adapt to the use of social media, not change social media.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.